Now I'm going to tell you my favorite fairy tale from the Grimm Brothers collection, 12 Dancing Princesses. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful land ruled by a king and a queen who ruled the land so fairly and so wisely that everyone in the kingdom loved them. Well, except for one of the king's advisors, who was secretly an evil wizard who wanted to control the kingdom himself. Now, the king and the queen had everything they could ever want. Well, except for one thing. While they had 12 beautiful daughters, they'd always wanted a son, too. So the evil wizard saw this as his opportunity and convinced the king that the reason they didn't have a son was that someone had cast an evil spell over them. Now, this simply wasn't true. But the king believed his advisor and banished magic from the land. Now the queen knew this was a mistake because it was the good magic that kept out the evil magic. So she sought the help of her best friend, the local fairy godmother, and she and her family moved into the castle to help protect the king and the queen and the princesses. Now, the youngest princess, the 12th princess, was the same age as the fairy godmother's son, and they grew up in the castle together as best friends. One day, when the princesses were older, the evil wizard saw an opportunity to take over the kingdom. He cast a spell over the princesses. At first, no one knew what was wrong. All they knew was that every morning the princesses would be exhausted and their shoes would be all worn out. So the king sent in his servants to watch the princesses and see what they did all night. But every night the servants would fall asleep. So the king and the queen themselves went in to watch the princesses sleep, and they fell asleep too. Well, this was getting to be a very big problem. The princesses were so exhausted they had to sleep all day long. So the king promised that anyone who could find out what was causing the princesses so many problems could marry one of the princesses and become king himself someday. So kings came, and princes came, and dukes came, and knights came, and anyone came to see if they could find out what was going on with the princesses. But they all fell asleep, so no one could solve the problem. One day, the fairy godmother realized that it must be the evil wizard, the advisor. She saw him doing a spell in the hallway and figured it out. So she sent her son, the youngest princess's best friend, with a cloak of invisibility and an anti-sleeping potion to watch the princesses. Now he put on the cloak of invisibility and went into the room before the princesses so they wouldn't see him. And then he drank the potion, and when the rest of the castle fell asleep, he was not. And he saw that the princesses did not go to sleep, but they were under a spell, and a magical trapdoor opened up in their floor, and they went down a staircase into a magical land. And in this land there was a forest with trees with silver leaves. To prove his story, he broke off one of the silver leaves, and it made a noise that startled the youngest princess. And no one listened to her when she said there must be someone with us. So they kept going through the forest to a land with golden leaves, and he broke off one of those, but again, no one listened to the youngest princess. And then they came to a lake, and in the lake there were 12 boats with 12 princes, who rowed the princesses across the lake to a magical castle. And in the castle there was a dance floor where the princesses danced all night long. And he noticed that the princesses didn't look happy at all. They looked like they hated this horrible spell. So he determined that they would not have to do this any more. He went back to the castle and followed them, and went right to the king and queen and showed them the silver and gold leaves and told them what was going on. Between him and the fairy godmother, his mother, they broke the spell and saved the princesses. So the king asked him which one of the princesses he would like to marry, and of course he chose his best friend, the youngest princess, and they ruled the kingdom just as well as the king and the queen had, and were loved just as much. The end.